We are subject to what's called the Utah Open and Public Meetings Act. This is a state law that is very important. The state legislature and the press and the public takes this very seriously. The Utah Open and Public Meetings Act says that it is the policy of the state of Utah that all public bodies will make their decisions and conduct their deliberations in public. The policy is in favor of transparency. To make that law work, what they have said is that every meeting of the council or the planning commission must be an open and public meeting. So they define meeting for you, and that's the question that was asked here by this gentleman. 3 council members, can they meet? If a quorum is convened, it is a meeting. And you have to be in compliance with the Open and Public Meetings Act. A mayor and 2 is not a meeting in the 6-member council form. A mayor and 2 in Glendale is a meeting. You have to comply with the Open and Public Meetings Act. If you get a quorum together, it is a meeting. The only exceptions to that are chance encounters and purely social occasions. It's easy to comply with the Open and Public Meetings Act. All the Act requires is 2 things. Notice to the public about the date, time, place, and subject matter of the meeting, and that the doors have to be open for the public to come in and watch you meet. Boy, I thought that was mine for sure. The notice has to be of 2 forms. First, councils who hold regular meetings, and by the way, you're required to meet at least once a month, have to establish a regular meeting schedule and post that at the place of the meetings and post it on the state public notice website that the state provides and send a copy of that to your local news media. The second form is that for each individual meeting, you will establish an agenda at least 24 hours before the meeting. Post that at the place of the meeting, post it on the state public notice meeting website, and send a copy of that to your news media. That's the minimum. You can do more than that. You're encouraged to put it on your own websites. You can put it all over town. You could pay to advertise it if you want, but you don't have to pay anybody to advertise it. This is just for your regular meetings. That's the minimum notice. The agenda is supposed to set out for the public to know what you're planning to discuss at that meeting. 24 hours. It's easy to comply with. Your regular meetings and special meetings. The mayor could call a special meeting whenever he wanted to, or any 2 council members could call a special meeting. If you call a special meeting, a call of the meeting and notice of the meeting has to be given to all the council members since it's not a regular meeting, and the same kind of public notice be given. Posted on the place of the meeting, public notice website, agenda at least 24 hours in advance. There are no exceptions except for emergency meetings. An emergency means the flood is coming, the fire is burning. It does not mean we forgot to do the notice. That's not an emergency, that's a mistake. It doesn't mean it was inconvenient for us to meet on the day we called it, but we can do it the next day. That's an inconvenience, it's not an emergency. Okay, once you're in that open and public meeting, you've done the notice, then what the Open Public Meetings Law says is this. We're going to require you to keep a record of that meeting. And that record will be in 2 forms. You're going to have the meeting recorded, and you're going to have written minutes. The written minutes will be the official record of that meeting, and the recording will be a public document that's available to the public that they can listen to at no cost anytime they want. And you're going to be required to have a minimum amount of stuff in those official minutes. And that minimum amount of stuff is not a transcription of what went on in the meeting, but the substance of what went on and the actual vote by name of any members of that committee on how they vote on a matter. And then the law says that if it's not on the agenda for that meeting, you cannot take any final action on the matter. Now, if it comes up and the mayor doesn't object to it being discussed, or the chair of the meeting doesn't object, you can discuss something that might come from the public that wasn't on the agenda, but you can't take a vote on it, you can't take any final action, you have to put it on an agenda so the public knows. So the Open and Public Meetings Act, very straightforward, very easy to comply with. I represent, one of my clients I represent, for example, Alpine City. Alpine City meets on the second and fourth Tuesdays of every month. In January, that recorder will send out a new notice to the Provo Daily Herald, which is the newspaper that she likes to send it to there in Utah County. Just a thing saying our meetings are going to be on the second and fourth Tuesday of every month, and they're going to start at 7 o'clock, and they're going to be held at 20 North Main Street, Alpine, Utah, in the City Hall. That complies with the annual notice thing. And then before each meeting, she is going to post on the state public notice website an agenda for that meeting, at least 24 hours before, and she's going to put on that agenda the items that the mayor or council have asked that they be put on. And the idea is that the residents of Alpine are smart enough to know, oh, it's the second Tuesday in January. There's a city council meeting. I think I will get on my internet and go to Utah Public Notice website and click on Alpine City and see what they're going to talk about and decide if I want to go. Or if you're over 55, they say, oh, I think I'll walk down to the City Hall and check on the door and see if I want to go to that meeting tonight. Because us guys who are old enough think of doing that before we go on the internet. And then they look and say, oh, look, they're going to talk about the big issue in Alpine, by the way, is urban deer population. Half the town wants to slaughter them like chickens at the Smith's meat factory, and the other half want to feed them. And man, and Alpine's got a lot of rich people. You get rich people who are mad that their tulips are being eaten in a fight with rich people who think that Bambi ought to be allowed to come up to their back steps for their granddaughter to give apples to, and that's a mean fight. I mean,
tell them to put hair out.
Well, man, they've put everything out. But anyway, that's going to be on the agenda, January 12th, Alpine City, Utah. There'll be 500 people there arguing with each other. And they know it, but they would never put that on to make a decision, discuss that or make a decision without it being on the agenda. Even though if no one shows up, that Alpine City Council and staff will come up with a reasonable solution to that problem in about 20 minutes. But that meeting on January 12th is going to take 4 hours on that one topic. I know that because I've already sat through 3 of them. That's what the Open and Public Meetings Act requires, and that's what it does. It gets public involvement. It keeps council members from making easy decisions in quiet places where they're not being bothered. It makes them make tough decisions in public in front of people who care a lot about it. Any questions thus far about the Open Public? Yes?
Okay, you set up an agenda and you have a meeting. And how much input do you have from the community before it turns into a public hearing?
Okay, that's a good question. A public meeting is different from a public hearing. The Open and Public Meetings Act requires all your meetings to be public meetings, not public hearings. There are some things that require public hearings. That's not required under the Open and Public Meetings Act. Those will be things required under other areas of the law. So for example, you're required to have a public hearing before you amend or adopt a zoning ordinance. At least one, either at the Planning Commission or the City Council. City Council is required to have a public hearing to adopt the budget and adopt their tax rate. You're required to have a public hearing in front of the City Council when you adopt an ordinance setting your own salaries. Those are required public hearings. The difference between a public hearing and a public meeting is this. At a public meeting, The public's right to participate is established by the council and the mayor, and it could be the public has no right to speak, or it could be something in between. Public hearing, the law says the public has a right to speak on it, or you can't do that. The law requires all of you on planning commissions or city councils to have adopted rules of procedure, like Robert's Rules of Order or something. Those rules of procedure should lay out the level and how you control public input in your meetings. So for example, most cities that I attend city council meetings, and I also go to every North Salt Lake City Council meeting, first and third Tuesdays. By the way, I've been to a city council meeting every Tuesday night since 1980. I'm tired of them. Now I go to one every other Wednesday too, along with them. But in North Salt Lake, third item on their agenda after they have their little opening on that is an item, public comment. The mayor there says, it's in their rules, invite any member of the public to come up to speak for as long as 2 minutes on any item that's not on the agenda. And then we do that. And then when that's done, the public is not invited to speak on any subject matter on the agenda unless it's a public hearing or unless the mayor or council requests that a member of the public give some input. They run it very formally. Now, I also go to the Vineyard Town Council meetings every other Wednesday night. That thing's run like, they think they have rules, but those members of the Vineyard Town public who show up, they think that the fact they took the time to show up entitles him to speak on every issue that comes up before everything, and that mayor who chairs it feels very happy doing it, and the council doesn't object. So they have that comment period at the start of the meeting too, but during the meeting, people interrupt all the time and comment and stand up and add their own stuff just like they were on the council. And that's all right too. It doesn't make it a public hearing, still a public meeting, but it's completely up to you on how you want to do it. I favor formality. I think the public respects us more. I favor a strong chair. The stronger the chair, the better. Council members, adopt rules of procedure and make your chair do it. The more formal we run our meetings, the more like church and the less like kindergarten, the more the public will treat us with the reverence that we give the minister and less like the rudeness that the little kids give the teachers. Years ago, I used to represent Moab City. I represented Moab City. I drove down from Salt Lake once a month or something because the mayor hated the council and the council hated the mayor. They couldn't agree on a local attorney and they agreed that I'd do it until they could agree. So I'd drive down, and the first meeting I went down there, I knew they hated each other. Go to the council meeting and the mayor's there and he's chairing it and everybody's polite. And the mayor was a strong chair. And no member of the public spoke unless recognized by the chair. And council members would say, and no staff member interrupted unless recognized by the chair. And they treated each other with respect. And it was a wonderful meeting. And I learned a lot from that. Formality took the heat out of the room. The public treated them like respected elected officials. They treated each other with respect, and the meetings went quickly. Now, I've been to meetings where everybody likes each other and they do it, and they can't get something that takes 10 minutes done in 2 hours because they let everybody talk and they let everybody go on. The chair doesn't exert his or her authority over the meeting. Okay, so adopt rules of procedure. Now, every meeting's an open and public meeting. Some portions of the open and public meeting can be closed for certain reasons, and that's what we call executive sessions or closed meetings. The reasons for you that allow you to close a meeting are laid out by the state legislature. They are to be strictly interpreted. They can't be expanded. This is the way to think about it. Every meeting starts as an open public meeting. If you get to an item on the agenda that meets the definition of one of these things in state law, you have the right to close that portion of the meeting if you hold a vote to close it, the minutes reflect the purpose for which you're closing it, and instead of a simple majority voting to close it, it takes a 2/3 vote to close it. So, 5-member council, it'll take 4 of you to vote yes, let's close it. 6-member council, it'd take 4 council members to vote yes to close the meeting. These are the reasons that you can close the meeting, and these reasons only. You can close it to discuss the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual. Not to talk about personnel policies, not to talk about personnel issues, to talk about a person. You can close it to hold a strategy session on collective bargaining. None of you guys in this room collectively bargain, by the way. I know who bargains in the state, and it's none of you guys. Maybe you do. You're the union rep from Beaver County. You can hold a meeting to talk about the strategy on pending or reasonably imminent litigation. I've been to Springdale and talked about litigation. I've been to Beaver and talked about litigation. You meet with your lawyers on imminent or pending. It doesn't mean that you can close a meeting every time someone threatens to sue you. You at least got to know the name of their attorney and what the issue is and what court you're going to be in. You can close a meeting to talk about the strategy on the purchase or sale of property if you need to do that to make sure you get the best price. You can't close it to talk about should we buy. That's the public policy stuff. Or should we sell? That's public policy. Once you make that policy decision, you can close the meeting to talk about, all right, let's offer $200,000, but we're willing to go to $400,000. That kind of stuff. You can close the meeting to talk about the deployment of security devices. You know, here's the key to the code pad on the door. Here's the safe. Yes?
Does it remain recorded? Do you still record?
Good question. Closed meetings are recorded, except for talking about deployment of security devices or if you're talking about a person. The theory on that is no one wants a recording around that has the key to the code pad, to the safe on it. And a recording device, frankly, kind of stifles discussion when you're talking about a person because everyone's afraid that someone's going to eventually listen to that recording device. Only those two things. And then if the chair of the meeting signs an affidavit that says, we swear the only thing we talked about was the character competency of an individual, you don't have to record. But the recording of the closed meeting is not a public document. It's a protected document. It is not available to the public. It's available to a judge to review if someone challenges you on whether it's recorded or not. Yes?
What's the definition of a person?
What?
What's the definition of a person in this case?
Can you name them? Are they living people?
But is there not some restriction on, you don't just close a meeting to talk about somebody, there's a reason that you're talking about somebody.
What?
So is it an employee?
Could be an employee, could be another council member, it could be a neighbor in another town. If you are talking about the character, the health, the competence of an individual, and the council feels like that's necessary for the public's business, you can do that in a closed meeting. And the reasons ought to be obvious to us all. First, you want a frank discussion if it's absolute needs, and there are private information there that public should not have. And you don't want to disseminate private information about people because you might be violating some of their rights. So let's give examples. Let's say an employee gets sick, serious cancer, hasn't told anybody, tells the manager, you know, I've got this problem. I'm going to need a lot of time off. I'm going to need you to work with me on it. Please don't share this in the community. I haven't shared it with everybody. Manager's going to want to go in and tell the council, you know, we got a problem. We might have to up staff. We got a problem here. The vote to close the meeting. You go in that meeting. You say, hey, I just wanted to tell you that, you know, so-and-so's got a serious health issue. He's going to have to take a lot of time off, and it might affect our health insurance rates, and I don't know if he's got enough sick leave, and how are we going to help him? That kind of thing. Now, that's appropriate to close it. Where it's not appropriate to close it is, should we give the employees a raise? All the employees, where you're not talking about an individual. That's a public policy thing. Okay, the other reasons that you can close it. Investigate criminal conduct. And then there are some others that don't apply to you. So basically you have 5 reasons, depending on how you count them. To talk about a person, to talk about criminal investigations, when you're dealing with buying and selling property, when you're talking with your lawyer about litigation, or when you're handing out the code to the front door. Deployment of security devices. Yes?
I think I spoke with you before about this. Now, in these small towns, everybody's related to everybody else. And if you're on a council member and you're related to somebody who you're going to have a close meeting about, I think it was you I talked to, you told me you can be there, because it's kind of hard sometimes you're related to everybody.
Well, yeah.
You just have to excuse yourself.
Yeah, let me just say, recuse yourself. Let me just say, the question comes up all the time, who can be in a closed meeting? The answer is members of the council and whoever the council thinks is necessary to carry out the purposes of the closed meeting. You can invite in the appraiser. You can invite in the lawyer. You can invite in the psychologist. Now, the hard part is, what if a council wants to meet to talk about another council member? Can we kick them out of the meeting? My answer, I got that asked just the other day. My answer to that is, you can ask them to leave, and if they refuse, there's no good way to kick them out, just don't hold the meeting. We'll find another way to talk about it. Because they are elected to be on the council. What the voters gave them was the right to sit on the council. All right, it's very important. You go to a closed meeting, you learn something, it's closed for a purpose. You do not have the right to violate the closed meeting purposes on your own. It takes a vote to make that public. The minutes of a closed meeting, the tape of a closed meeting, the information in a closed meeting is what's called a protected document under GRAMA, the Government Records Access and Management Act. On your own as a council person, you don't have the right to share that. Let me just tell you, that comes up all the time. I heard of a thing the other day that I won't share exactly, but here is an example. Let's say you're in a meeting and we're talking about the strategy on buying a piece of property. And you're sitting there and the appraiser says, or the mayor says, all right, we've got as much as $400,000 to buy this piece of property. And you'd agree that what you're going to do is start at $200,000, but you might go up to $4 million. And you're sitting there thinking, I know the guy that owns that property. If they offer him $2 million, he might take it. It sure seems unfair that he doesn't know that we'll go to $4 million. And maybe he's your friend. Maybe it's your neighbor. And you go out of that closed meeting and you whisper in their ear and say, by the way, when they offer you $2 million, I suggest you come back at something closer to $4 million. If you do that, you violated the provisions of the Closed Meeting Act, and you may have acted unethically, for sure, and may have committed a crime. If you think the information that was in a closed meeting should be made public, the way it's made public is by a vote of the same body that closed it, the council. By the way, planning commissioners, I cannot think of a reason for you ever to call a closed meeting unless you're meeting with your lawyer to talk about how to get out of the mess that you made on some other previous decision. Zoning decisions, we don't close meetings when they're hard decisions. General plans, we don't close meetings. It's not allowed in the law. Yes?
I was just curious, but one more curiosity. So do you ask the people to leave, or do you step into another room?
It depends on how your facilities are set up. In the vineyard town where I go, we ask the people to leave and tell them they can wait out in the cold where with the mosquitoes are until we get done, and then they come back in. North Salt Lake, they've got this beautiful little antechamber off of the side with a big old conference room table on it. By the way, North Salt Lake's been sued so often they've even got a name tag for their visiting attorneys around that conference table. And they have a whole different taping system that they can put on. They let the public stay in. Okay, if you violate the Open and Public Meetings Act, purposefully, intentionally, you can be charged with a crime. County attorneys and the attorney generals are charged with enforcing the Open and Public Meetings Act. You will know if you're violating the Open and Public Meetings Act. You will know if you're deliberating outside the public meeting. You will know if you're deciding outside the public sphere. You'll be the first to know. The public will suspect. I mean, if you get a tough, hot issue in town and the public's showing up and you show up a meeting and somebody, and we start in on it, and then somebody says, oh, I move that we rezone the South 40 for the reasons previously discussed. And people are going to go, previously discussed with whom, when? It'll be apparent that you've been discussing it off on the side or making your decision somewhere else. But if you, for example, get 3 of you together to secretly meet at somebody's house, knowing that you're violating the Open and Public Meetings Act to decide on some course or policy and how you're going to do it, and you've done that on purpose to keep out of the public eye and they catch you, there's the possibility that somebody's going to charge you with a misdemeanor. But for sure, you're going to be publicly embarrassed. Government is not meant to be efficient. It's meant to be transparent.